My mom chose my stepdad's children over me and demanded that I share my deceased father's inheritance. Before I get into what happened, here's some backstory. I'm a 17-year-old girl who lives with my mother, 43F, stepfather, and two stepsisters. I have a stepbrother, Jackson, who is a year older than me, and a stepsister, Emma, who is 2 years younger. We all attend the same high school, but we have no mutual acquaintances and have never been close. My mother and their father married after nearly 5 years of dating. The wedding occurred 3 years ago, but our families had been living together for 6 years, so the wedding was really a formality. My father went away when I was quite young, so I never got to spend much time with him. I scarcely remember him because I was so young when Dad died. My parents were never married and my father's family disapproved of my mother since she was a party girl with a bad reputation in their area. So they lived together for a brief period but didn't marry because his parents would have undoubtedly kicked him out. He was diagnosed with leukemia in its late stages at the age of 27, and it was too late to intervene. Fortunately, Dad had time to organize his affairs, and he was able to establish an education fund for me, so I wouldn't have to worry about the future, and my mother wouldn't have to force herself to work hard after his death. I've known about it since his lawyer informed me when I was very little. The lawyer was in charge of the money flow, but after I turned 18, I would have complete control over the fund. For a long time after my father died, it was just me and my mother, and I grew accustomed to it. Then, when I was about 8 years old, my stepfather entered the picture, and after a while of dating, we moved in together. My mother moved out of the town where we used to reside because she found it too traumatic to dwell where she and my father met. I've never met my paternal grandparents because they were never interested in meeting me. We periodically visit my mother's parents, and they are kind enough, but my mother's family is not very close. When I moved in with my stepfather and his children, I had high hopes that I'd finally have a large family. When I was younger, I had a lot of hopes, but unfortunately, my new family did not meet them. I don't blame them, but it was quite disappointing for me. When I was younger, it wasn't that they didn't make me feel welcome or treated me poorly, but there was something strange about everyone's energy. We all lived together, but we never felt like a family, and I never connected with my stepfather or his children. We lived in the same house, but they never tried to make me feel welcome or get to know me. I tried several times, but they did not appear enthused, so I gave up after a few months. I understood that we were more like glorified roommates than true family members, and that was it. I did not romanticize it. My mother, however, told a different narrative. They treated her differently. The mood toward my mother was radically different. They treated her as if she were a member of the family. I could be mistaken, but I believe that my step-siblings and stepdad were pleased to include my mother and play happy family with her while excluding me was due to my stepdad's ex-wife being a nightmare. I've never met her, but according to what I've heard, she was a total gold digger who left my stepfather nearly bankrupt following their divorce. He had to start again in his life, and to make matters worse, he had to care for my step-siblings on his own after their mother gave up custody and abandoned them to be with her new partner shortly after their divorce. Meeting a woman like my mother, who is the polar opposite of his ex-wife, was probably beneficial to all of them, but I wasn't really needed in that situation. They made me feel like an afterthought. I can't quantify it or give particular examples, but it was all about vibes and energy. Despite being a member of the family, I always felt that I wasn't really a part of it. My only consolation was the thought that I might have been overthinking things, something I used to tell myself when things got too much for me. It is strange to admit this, but I was genuinely jealous because it appeared that my mother had finally found her people, while I remained on the outside. After a few years, I began to dislike everyone because I felt left behind. I never mentioned it to anyone since it seemed tiny and insignificant, and I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. That was how life was, and while I wasn't happy about it, I was still content. Now back to what happened a few days earlier. I've been researching universities for the past several weeks because I'm about to graduate in a few months and need to start sending out applications. I wasn't concerned about the money since, as I previously stated, my mother had always informed me that there was a fund put aside for me, which I intended to use. But then, a few days ago, my mother said she needed to speak with me about something very serious. She explained that my stepfather had been unable to save enough money for his children to attend college, so she asked me to assist the family and allow my step-siblings to use the money from my college fund as well. Jackson had taken a gap year and was set to enter college at the same time as me, so that was the primary focus of our chat. Legally, my mother had no influence over the assets because my father's will clearly stated that only I would be able to choose where the money was spent after I turned 18. To be honest, I did not want to split the money with my step-siblings. For starters, I didn't consider them family, and neither did they. Second, even if I don't use the entire amount that my father set aside for me, I'd like to keep it for myself. That kind of money could help me get a head start. Useful for when I obtain my own apartment and starting living on my own until I start earning. I had already saved a lot because I went to public school rather than private, so my mother did not have to spend any money on my education thus far. I was also an excellent student, so I hoped to receive a scholarship at whatever institution I applied to and enrolled in. Money had never been a problem for me, but as I grew older and approached 18 in a few months, I began to consider saving and earning. Giving money from my fund to my step-siblings didn't seem like a good idea, so I informed my mother that I would not be sharing those cash with them since I did not believe it was necessary. If Jackson truly wanted to attend college, he could simply take out a student loan, like millions of other students do. My mother was not pleased with my response and accused me of being selfish. I didn't even disagree. I was being selfish, and I saw nothing wrong with it. So instead of battling with her, I simply informed her that I was being selfish, which was perfectly acceptable because I did not consider my step-siblings family. That's when my mother yelled at me, as if what I said was a criminal violation. It took me a few seconds to realize she was losing her mind because I had given her the truth. I did not consider my step-sibling family. The double standard was ridiculous. On the one hand, my family had treated me as an outsider for the past 8 years, and she never seemed to notice. Or perhaps she did, but she didn't care. However, when it came to me, I was suddenly expected to consider them family and treat them as such for no apparent reason. I attempted to speak to her quietly and without yelling, but it was pointless because she was already yelling at me and calling me ungrateful, among other things. So I waited for her to stop yelling before telling her that she could scream all she wanted, but I wouldn't change my mind. All that screaming at me would do was alienate me even more and make me less likely to support them in any manner. My mother calmed down a little after I said that, and I assumed we were finally going to have a sensible conversation in which I could express my feelings. But that was foolish of me. I had forgotten that in this environment, my sentiments were irrelevant. What mattered was whether my mother, stepfather, and step-siblings were content. None of them seemed to care about my pleasure. After my mother cooled down, she informed me that I had a week to decide. But if I didn't agree to divide the college fund with my step-siblings, she would have to kick me out of the family. I assumed she was joking because it looked so ludicrous, but she assured me otherwise. With my birthday approaching in less than a month, she stated that she would soon no longer be legally compelled to let me remain with them because I would not be a child. So I'd be on my own if I didn't agree to share the college fund that my father had set aside for me. I couldn't believe my own mother would say such a thing and put me in such a tough situation for the sake of my step-siblings, especially since I was meant to be her own flesh and blood. She advised me to tread carefully and think it over, since this decision could cost me everything. She then exited the room, leaving me to absorb what she had just said. It was extremely insulting to be treated that way by my own mother, and I decided that day that I was going to get out of this house no matter what the cost. So I began talking to my friends and told them that I needed help finding an apartment of my own because I was planning to move out for my 18th birthday. I told them what my mother had stated and emphasized the severity of the situation. I knew that after I turned 18, I'd have control over the money and could select where to spend it. Yes, I would have to stick to a budget and carefully select my college degree, but it was worth it since it meant I could move out and live on my own instead of putting up with my family. Or forcing them to tolerate me. After that chat with my mother, it became clearer than ever that I was not welcome in that house at all, and I had been treated as an afterthought all these years. I realized I had not overthought anything. In fact, I may have been underthinking things because I had never expected this. A few days later, a friend informed me that she had spoken with a cousin who was also applying to the same universities as I was, because we shared similar interests. Her cousin planned to live in an apartment since she wanted to be self-sufficient from the start. My buddy suggested I contact her cousin, and if we ended up attending the same college, we could rent an apartment together. I thought it was a brilliant idea and phoned her cousin right away. We figured things out, and I informed her of my condition. She was empathetic, and I could tell she was a pleasant person with whom I would get along, so that was resolved. The only thing left to worry about was where I'd live until college started, which was still a few months away. Fortunately, my friends said I could stay with them until college started. It was a dirty and risky scheme, but I was willing to go along with it since anything was preferable to living with my mother and her family. After the dispute with my mother, I was treated horribly. They weren't yelling at me or being blatantly harsh, but rather in a humiliating way. They'd all banded together against me, treating me as if I were the most repulsive thing alive. Every time I entered a room, everyone would stop chatting and leave, returning to their respective spaces. They constantly gave me the side eye and refused to speak to me, as if I had done something terrible. It was so humiliating that I wanted to run away. It took a long time to plan something for myself, but I was determined. As soon as my friends were ready to take me in, I would depart. When my mother asked me again whether I had changed my mind, I decided to tell her the truth and leave. I assured her I hadn't altered my mind and was indeed intending to depart. I said that the way she and her family had been treating me over the last week was nothing short of crazy, and I couldn't take it any longer. I told her I'd already spoken with friends and would be staying with them until I could start college and relocate far away. I made it clear that I did not want to see her again. So she might kick me out. It would make no difference to me. I already had a plan, so I wasn't surprised when my mother yelled at me again, asking me to leave since her house wasn't for selfish, ungrateful brats like me. I left, relieved to be rid of them. But it wasn't the end of my plans. During my time alone in my room, I had been planning methods to retaliate against my mother. My life had taken a bad turn after she married my stepfather, and she didn't seem to mind because she was content with her new family. I had tried to be pleased for her while suppressing my emotions, but it was clear now that she did not care about me at all. Her stepchildren were more important to her than I was. The way she treated me made me feel terrible, and I was determined not to let it go unanswered. So as soon as I got out of the home, I resolved to confront her for who she truly was. The only reason I waited a week to speak out about her unreasonable expectations was that I didn't want her to have access to me or the power to express her disappointment in me. I knew nobody in their right mind would ever agree with what she had said to me. After moving in with a friend, I decided to go online and write a post about my mother. I wrote about how my mother raged at me because I refused to pay to my step-siblings' education fund. I explained that none of them had ever treated me like family, and my mother didn't seem to care. It only became an issue when I handled them in the same manner. I discussed the double standards and how my mother had almost completely forgotten about me after moving in with her new family. I also stated that I considered my mother to be the single most selfish person on the earth because of how she had been treating me simply for saying no to something utterly stupid. Any rational person in my situation would have said no, especially because the money she was discussing was left exclusively for me by my father. It wasn't for anyone else to use, and I didn't think it was fair of her to want me to share it with people who had never treated me like a member of their family. I might have contemplated it if my step-siblings had been good to me at some point, but that was not the case. I was quite frustrated and I vented my feelings in that single post. I knew this would have a severe influence on my mother, especially because many of her friends and their children followed me on social media, but I didn't care at the time. All I wanted was to get back at her. To be honest, my mother had always been my sole source of support and happiness because I only had one parent to rely on. My grandparents were rarely in touch with me, so my mother's preference for my step-siblings over me felt like a major betrayal. I was really hurt and wanted to express myself without regard for the repercussions. So I made the post, and the results were precisely as I expected. My mother sent me multiple texts, claiming that I had ruined her life because everyone had seen the post, which had been shared numerous times. My mother was well liked within her circle of acquaintances, so it was not surprising that people were seeking for an excuse to gossip about her. I played right into their hands. She attempted to call me multiple times, but I did not answer or react to any SMS. I was terrible and had hoped that writing the post would make me feel better, but the messages my mother gave me made me feel even worse about my decision. I could see from her text that she was quite torn about this. She said things like she never expected me to do this, that she thought she raised me to be nice and sympathetic, but I was the complete opposite, and she couldn't believe I was her daughter anymore. Then she hauled out the big guns and informed me that if my father were alive today and saw this vindictive and malicious side of me, he would be tremendously disappointed and would no longer want to be linked to me. That really got to me. And I started feeling like I'd done something bad. I began reconsidering everything, which led me here. At this time, I'm not sure if it was appropriate for me to refuse to share my college fund with my step-siblings. I'm not sure if I should try to make things right with my mother and the others since I don't think I can face them after what I did. But this could also be a brilliant strategy to manipulate me, and if so, it's certainly working. That's why I need your assistance. Now that everyone knows the data, I can finally reach a conclusion. So am I bad for refusing to share my college cash with my step-siblings and then creating a negative post about my mother? Update 1. Hello and thank you so much for your response. A lot of you sent me very nice words, which made me feel better about myself and what I did. I suppose I needed that to see things for what they are. I was about to give my mother another chance just because I wanted to see the good in her. I wanted to think she wasn't a nasty person, but what kind of mother speaks and acts the way she did? She's just not a decent person, and it's time I accepted that rather than fighting it. So I blocked her so she couldn't contact me again. I knew if she texted me, it was solely to influence me or get that post removed. I do not want to take that post down. I want it to remain up till she apologizes to me. She knows where I am because my friend's mother informed her that I live with them, and she knows how to contact me. If she doesn't contact me, I'll consider it as an indication that she just cares about her reputation. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since I moved out and started living with a friend. Since that post, I have had no touch with anyone in my family. I did attend school for a few days and bumped into Emily a couple of times, but she simply gave me a nasty look and like I didn't exist. Not unexpected, given that they've been pretending I don't exist for the previous 8 years, so it must be even simpler now. Anyway, my mother eventually came to see me last evening. She arrived with a black plastic garbage bag and put it in the living room, claiming it included all of my leftovers, basically everything I had managed to get into my duffel bag before leaving the house. It felt a little disrespectful that she had used a garbage bag to pack my belongings, and it was even more insulting when she threw everything on the living room floor, leaving me to gather it. My friend and her parents, who witnessed this, were appalled. They did not enjoy my mother's behavior and even took it upon themselves to quarrel with her over it. They advised her that given that I was her only daughter, she should have compassion for me instead of treating me so harshly. They really drilled her, and she didn't take it well. She informed them they had no right to discuss her parenting methods because they were the ones harboring a delinquent like me. I almost broke out laughing when she said that since I was not a delinquent, I was a scholar student and she knew it. I almost addressed it myself, but I didn't have to because my friend stuck up for me. She told my mother off, saying she was grateful her parents were not like mine and had a heart. It developed into a catfight after that, and my mother became enraged and fled. I was really grateful for my friend and her folks. I don't think they needed to stand up for me, but they did, and I couldn't be happier. This was probably the first time in my life that I had someone fight for me, and it was quite moving. But, in any case, I doubt my mother will return anytime soon because, after the reception she received yesterday, I wouldn't dare to show up around here again if I were her. I truly hope she doesn't show up because I'm tired of the drama. I simply want to go on with my life and start a new chapter, but I can't because she keeps reappearing. So I hope this is the last time I have to deal with her. Update 3. Hello everyone, long time no see. I've been MIA for a few months I believe, but you can't blame me. I've been applying to colleges, hoping to get into a good one with a scholarship. I've been working extremely hard and it has all paid off. I got into my first choice school, and I'm keeping to the strategy I devised a few months ago. My friend's cousin, who applied to the same universities, was also accepted, and we plan to rent an apartment and live together. She's a really sweet girl, and the fact that she's my friend's cousin is just icing on the cake since it allows me to stay in touch with everyone. The last few months have been really challenging for me emotionally, but my friends have helped me get through everything. I can't express how grateful I am to have such folks in my life. I know that many people with bad parents and families rely on their friends for emotional support, but I attempted to avoid it. However, now that I know how far my friends will go for me, I feel like they are family. I will always be grateful for everything individuals have done for me. Seriously, I don't think I could have gotten this far without everyone's help. Even the people here who reached out via message and said such encouraging things to help me get through this. It's just bizarre and funny that my mother hasn't texted me once since I moved out. She didn't care that I had unblocked her and she could now speak to me. That is how little I mean to her. But you and my pals advised me to believe in myself because I could accomplish it. It's pretty funny how strangers on the internet helped me more than my mother ever did. But that's all in the past. I'm looking forward to a fresh start here, and I'm quite thrilled about what the future holds.